Good evening, 3B. It's Miss Ghostin, and I am coming at you live from my back porch with tonight's reading, A Dog's Porpoise. When we last left the story on Friday, Lars had wakened from a nightmare and realized that he was imagining this horrible dream, but he was in search of something. And the last sentence ended, after all, friends came back for friends, and he had a friend to find. Chapter 7, Natalie. Natalie was too tired to dream, so from the moment she closed her eyes to the moment she woke up, it felt like no time had passed at all. But she knew that time had passed, because when she had gone to bed, it had been dark outside, and now morning light was streaming through her window. Also, when she had gone to bed, it had been very quiet in the house, and now a crazed animal was attempting to claw her door down. "I'm coming, I'm coming! Lars, calm down, I'm coming!" Natalie couldn't help but smile as she got out of bed, putting on her flip-flops and hurrying to open her door. Lars, who had been up on his hind legs, scratching away at the door, toppled into the room ungracefully, landing on his back. But even as Natalie laughed and leaned down to give him a belly rub, he was already up off the ground again, running in circles around Natalie's feet. "What in the world has gotten into you?" she asked. Lars just barked and shot out of her room, trying to round a corner so fast that he skidded on the hallway's hardwood floor and slammed into the wall of the shack. Natalie laughed again, and Lars immediately picked himself up, dusted himself off, and disappeared down the hall. Well, there was no use standing there. Natalie grabbed her windbreaker off its door hanger and zipped it over her pajama top, and then dashed down the hall after Lars. Already, Lars was at the front door, where he'd resumed his holding pattern of circling around once, jumping up, scratching at the door, falling back down, and circling around again, punctuating the whole looping process with various yips and barks. Natalie had never seen him so agitated, but he didn't seem upset. He seemed more impatient and excited about something. "Do you need to go outside?" Natalie asked. "Do you have to pee?" That made her think of something. "Wait, hold on. Are you even house trained? We should really figure that out." But that would have to wait until another day. Lars barked again, and from somewhere in the shack, Mr. Prater yelled, "Natalie, make him be quiet or make him leave." Natalie shrugged and looked down at Lars. "You heard the man," she said, opening the door. It was like releasing a rock from a slingshot. Lars was out the door so fast that Natalie didn't even see his feet touch the ground. She laughed as he shot across the yard, waiting to see what spot he would choose to do his duty. But Lars didn't choose a spot in the yard. He didn't stay in the yard at all. "Wait, Lars!" Natalie called out, but it was too late. He shot down the driveway into the street and right down the road that would take him through Main Street and back to the beach. Quickly, Natalie kicked off her flip-flops and shoved her feet into her running shoes. She had already lost this dog once in the last 24 hours, and she wasn't about to do it again. "I'll be back soon, Dad. Bye," she yelled. "Wait, what?" Mr. Prater yelled back, but Natalie was already off. Lars was fast, but he was new in town, and Natalie knew these streets like she knew the halls of her own home. If Lars stayed on the main road, she knew she could take a shortcut by doubling behind her own house, leaping over the fence in the backyard, and cutting across the yard of— "Hi, Nancy Jane," she yelled. Her next-door neighbor was up to her usual Sunday morning routine, painting a tranquil scene of the birds in her backyard. Presumably, she would not include the girl running by at high speed. "Morning, Natalie," Nancy Jane yelled back. "Did you get those photos of the storm last night? It looked like a humdinger." "I did," Natalie responded as she hopped over the fence on the other side of Nancy Jane's yard. "If you want to see them, I think I'll be at the beach." Then she was back on Main Street, and if she looked down the road to her right, there, Lars. He rocketed past a young boy, barely avoiding a collision, much to the delight of the child and the alarm of the mother just behind him. Natalie recognized her as the wife of Mr. Reardon, Ogunquit's best lobsterman and head of the Lobstermen's Union. "Sorry, Mr. Reardon," Natalie said, as she too zoomed past the mother and child. Lars crossed the street, narrowly missing a bicycle, and so did Natalie. She chased the dog across the front lawn of Ogunquit Town Hall. "Hey, Miss Prater!" That was Mayor Mayer, returning from the Coveside Cafe with his morning coffee. "Did you see that stray dog go by just now? I've been trying to find him all week." "Yes, no, he's not a stray, he's mine," Natalie blurted out, and before anyone could contradict her or ask any follow-up questions, she was gone again. Lars was passing the Coveside Cafe now, which meant they were getting close to the beach. Natalie had no idea why a dog who had almost drowned just last night would be so eager to return to the scene of the thankfully not a crime, but she'd be darned if she let him out of her sight again. She picked up the pace, almost knocking into a tourist as they left the cafe, and before long she was practically on Lars' tail. But even though she'd had a good night's sleep, she was getting exhausted, and she felt like she'd run out of steam if they didn't reach the ocean soon. The buildings of Ogunquit dropped away and Perkins Coves rose up in their place. First came the boats, then the bridge, and then the beach, dazzling blue in the April morning light. Somehow Lars had already magically cleared the pile of rocks and reeds that separated the road from the beach proper, but Natalie had to scrabble her way down them, taking care not to twist her ankle or fall head first into a boulder. By the time she got down to level land, Lars was splashing happily across the tide, which was almost all the way in, and there, just a small distance from Lars, puff! Natalie gasped as the water broke apart, revealing the porpoise from last night. Moving with surprising grace for something so round and roly-poly, the porpoise breached, disappeared, and then breached again, this time keeping his head poked out of the water, chittering up a storm. Lars let loose a joyous noise and took the biggest leap Natalie had ever seen him make, falling back into the water with a titanic splash. In return, the porpoise chittered again and smacked his tail against the surface of the water, sending up a splash of his own. Now, with a rush of astonished delight, Natalie understood why Lars had been in such a hurry to return to the water. He wanted to play with the newest visitor to Perkins Cove. And no wonder. Everyone Lars met, he wanted to be friends with. Why should the porpoise who saved his life be any different? Watching the two animals chatter and frolic, Natalie couldn't imagine a happier moment. Then Lars broke away from the surf, running up to her. He circled her legs twice, shot back toward the water, and paused for the briefest moment to look back at Natalie. "Are you coming or not?" Never mind. This was her happiest moment. Natalie kicked off her shoes, glad she hadn't time to put on any socks to get all sandy, and dropped her phone in her left sneaker. She rolled up her pajama pants, knotting the ends to keep them from getting wet. Then, slowly, tentatively, not wanting to blow this, she made her way into the water. The morning sand was smooth and dense, and her toes dug in with each footfall, holding firm as the cold water rushed around her ankles. From its spot in the water, the porpoise eyed her warily, and then surged a little closer, but not too close. The water around Natalie was way too shallow for him anyway. Natalie exhaled deeply and, wondering why she'd even bothered to roll up her pajama pants, stepped farther into the ocean. Soon the water was up to her waist, and she began to shiver. She considered herself pretty good at swimming in cold water, but April was still a rough time for a morning dip. The best thing to do would be to dunk herself in all at once and get it over with. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and plunged in. The shock of the cold water felt like an icy hand squeezing on her lungs, but when she came back up and pushed her wet hair out of her eyes, she was no longer shivering, and the porpoise was right next to her. Natalie gasped, and a chill ran up her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. But when the porpoise looked up at her with his deep black eyes, she knew she had nothing to be afraid of. Up close, his short snout looked as round and huggable as the rest of his body, and his mouth was curved upward in a slight but unmistakable smile. "Hello," Natalie said. "Thank you for saving my friend." The porpoise lazily flapped his fluke up and down, and in doing so, inched ever so slightly closer to Natalie in the water. "Hello to you too." Natalie reached out and gently, slowly, rested one hand on the side of the porpoise's body and the other in between his eyes. His skin was smooth and rubbery and barely warmer than the water around it. But Natalie could feel the life inside, the muscles all made for swimming and spinning and leaping and playing. Just a few inches away from her hand, a pectoral fin pierced the water, and Natalie's gaze was caught by an unexpected gleam of silver. She leaned in closely, and the next time the water parted, she saw it, a small metal tag attached to the fold of her new friend's fin. Natalie had heard of these tags. Marine biologists placed them on dolphins and porpoises when they were young to track their movements as they grew older. When Natalie looked closer, she could even make out a label written on the tag. She leaned in and squinted through the water. "Bangor," she read aloud at last. Bangor was a city that was certainly big enough to have a marine biology institute, but it was over 100 miles up the coast. She thought about the long journey this porpoise must have taken to get here and let out a low whistle of astonishment. Whew! Natalie's jaw dropped. The porpoise had whistled back. "Bangor," she said again, and the porpoise turned his head slightly to look up at her. And then Lars leaped from the shallow end of the surf, belly flapping into the water and splashing them both. Joyous chaos broke out. Natalie laughed and splashed Lars back as Bangor dove into the water and then re-emerged between Natalie and Lars, puffing water onto both of them and brushing each of them playfully with his fins. As Lars paddled happily in circles around them, Bangor spun around quickly and went back down into the water. "Wait for me," Natalie cried, and then she too dove underwater. She'd been practicing swimming with her eyes open since she was in elementary school, and now she was glad she had, because when she opened her eyes, she was able to see Bangor swimming rapidly out and down into the water, and then reversing course and returning at an even faster pace than he'd swum away. Natalie had just enough time to push herself back out of the water, and then, whoosh, Bangor burst entirely free from the ocean. For a moment, he hung in the air, his body one big arc, droplets of water flying from his back and glittering in the morning light. Then gravity pulled on his heavy porpoise body, and he fell back into the water with the biggest splash any of them had made yet. Natalie laughed, and Lars rolled several feet backward as Bangor poked his head out of the water and chittered sheepishly. Natalie never wanted this to end. "Natalie!" Not knowing what to expect, Natalie turned and saw her father standing on the beach, also wearing his pajamas. He must have followed his daughter to see where she was running in such a hurry. His hands were on his hips, and he was shaking his head and laughing in disbelief, and he wasn't alone. Natalie and Lars's mad dash through town had clearly attracted some attention, and now the people of Ogunquit were flocking to the beach to see what all the commotion was about. "Look," someone said, "that dog and that dolphin are playing together." "I think that's actually a harbor porpoise," someone responded. "Isn't that a stray dog?" a woman asked. "I heard that girl say it was her dog." "Oh, really? And is that her porpoise?" As the crowd grew, Natalie made out some familiar faces. There was Nancy Jane, clasping her hands together and smiling widely. There was Mrs. Reardon, totally flabbergasted, trying as best she could to hold on to her young son, Sam, as he yelled, "Let me in, Mommy! I want to go swim with them!" And there was Mayor, his expression entirely unreadable. He sipped his coffee as he coolly gazed at the dog and porpoise that were even now drawing more and more people to the beach. Something about the mayor's demeanor made Natalie nervous. But then she saw Nancy Jane talking excitedly to Natalie's father about the best way to paint porpoises, and seeing her like that made Natalie feel happy. Then Banger puffed and shot past at high speed, doing another loop around Lars before going back under for a few seconds, then re-emerging for another incredible jump. And that made Natalie happier still. And when Banger splashed back down, Mr. Prater turned to look, laughed, and gave his daughter a big smile and wave. It was the most carefree Natalie had seen him look in months, specifically in the months since Natalie's mother had moved in with Diver Bob. And seeing her father that happy, that made Natalie the happiest of all. And that is it for tonight. Tomorrow, Chapter 8, Banger. Have a great Monday night. I will read again tomorrow. Good night.